Here's what's coming up on the world today. Former Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan to be freed from custody a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest was unlawful. South Africa says it will hold an independent inquiry into claims that it loaded arms shipment to Russia. Plus, Turkey says Black Sea grain deal extension are nearing after talks from parties. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Susan Ilian. Pakistani's former Prime Minister Imran Khan is to be freed from custody a day after the Supreme Court ruled his dramatic arrest on corruption charges was unlawful. Judges granted Mr. Khan protected bail, meaning he cannot be rearrested for at least 2 weeks. Earlier, Mr. Khan said he believed he would be detained again immediately after his release. The 70-year-old's arrest escalated tensions between him and the military. Many analysts believe Mr. Khan's election win in 2018 happened with the help of the military, which both parties denied. But he later fell out with the army after a series of defections and amid mounting economic crisis. He lost his majority in parliament. Earlier, supporters of former Pakistani PM Imran Khan said they were optimistic he would be released later in the day. Mr. Khan's arrest earlier this week has sparked deadly unrest in the nuclear-armed nation. At least 10 people have been killed and some 2,000 arrested as unrest swept the country. Khan's Pakistani Tehreek-e-Insaf party said the charges against him, which relate to gifts given to him by foreign leaders while he served as prime minister, are politically motivated. The party added that thousands of peaceful Pakistanis from across the country will gather in Islamabad in solidarity with their leader. Pakistan Bureau Chief for Voice of America, Sarah Zaman, joins me now. Sarah, welcome to the program. A Pakistani court ordered former Prime Minister Imran Khan's release on bail for 2 weeks, a day after the Supreme Court ruled his arrest was illegal. Now, what more can you tell us, Sarah?
So today, the Supreme Court's ordered former Prime Minister Imran Khan appeared at the federal court, that's the Islamabad High Court in the nation's capital, and there he got another round of relief because in the case in which he had been dramatically arrested from the same court complex, he was given 2 weeks bail. In another 4 cases, he was given a week of bail. And then the court also ordered that he should not be arrested for any cases until May 15th. And then another bench also decided that he should not be arrested until May 17th for any cases that may have been registered since May 9th. And we know that, since that means that since his arrest, if there have been any cases of violence in which he has been named, he will not be arrested till the 17th of this month. So again, big relief for the former prime minister.
And so how should we understand the Supreme Court's rule to release the former prime minister? Is it a sign that civil institutions are working in this instance, or is there some other way to interpret this move?
So if you are a member of the PTI party, Imran Khan's party, then you believe that the justice was done. In fact, just a day ago, I met with one of the top members of his party who since has been arrested, Shea Mazari, and she said that she didn't have faith, her party didn't have faith in lower courts, but they had faith in the Supreme Court. And so if you're part of a member of Khan's party, you're happy, you feel that the court is giving you justice. But if you're part of the ruling coalition, then your narrative, your reaction is that the court is exhibiting double standard. And as soon as yesterday's judgment came from the Supreme Court, we saw the defense minister hold a press briefing in which he said that the court is exhibiting double standards and that Khan is not being given the same kind of harsh treatment that other politicians before him have been given, especially members of the ruling coalition. The Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz group that is leading the coalition, and Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif belongs to that coalition. So, and also other members of the PMLN party have also expressed great anger. The senior vice president of the party, who's the current prime minister's niece and the daughter of 3-time Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who was disqualified for life just a couple of years ago on charges that were not directly brought to the court. They were sort of related to a case that had been brought to the Supreme Court. So their narrative is that the court is not doing justice, that the court is facilitating Imran Khan. And Maryam Nawaz Sharif, the person that I'm referring to, the niece of the current prime minister, she said that the Chief Justice himself is now responsible for the chaos in the country because he is protecting what she called an evil.
And can you describe for people the unique relationship, Sarah, between leaders in Pakistan and the military? And also, it's not just a war of words. Khan supporters are actually taking to the streets action against military facilities.
So as far as the relationship between Pakistani politicians and the military in this country is concerned, it's an interesting one. It's also not something that many Pakistanis are proud of. And that's because the military in this country has a history of directly ruling for almost 3 decades. And this country is 75 years old, and roughly for 30 years or so, military directly ruled this country. And at other times, it was an open secret that the military would support or oppose certain politicians or parties, that it would foment coups. And also, it was an open secret that in this country, you cannot come to power without the support of the military, and you cannot take power without the support of the military. And then outgoing military chief Qamar Javed Bajwa, who retired last year, he basically made it public. He acknowledged in his parting address that military has interfered, the army has interfered in the country's political affairs for 70 years, and that is why it's catching a lot of flack at this time. And he was speaking in November. So what was once an open secret, he admitted to it. And so even now, the current government is deeply unpopular, and experts believe that this government would also not be in place if it didn't have the support of the establishment. And establishment is a euphemism that's used in Pakistan for the army. The word is used interchangeably just because the military, and particularly the army, is a very powerful institution, and direct criticism is very rare. So the term establishment is used. As far as Khan asking his supporters to attack the military, well, his narrative really has been that one, this is a natural organic reaction from people. And this is what would happen if you do something like this, if you dramatically arrest a very, very popular leader. But we have also heard this narrative from his party members that these people who went out and breached military installations, they were perhaps planted by the ruling coalition to make PTI look bad. So we're seeing different kinds of narrative from the party. But what we also saw today was that in the Islamabad High Court, the judge asked Imran Khan if he condemned the violence that had happened. And his lawyer said that, yes, his client did condemn it. And then the court said that it also wanted that in writing. So while Imran Khan did not actively ask his followers to go into military installations, the anger that he has expressed very publicly since his ouster last year has fomented a lot of anger within people. And a lot of Pakistanis do believe that Khan is correct. They back his allegations when he says that it's the army chief, in particular, the last one, who conspired his ouster. And now he's also blaming the current army chief for his dramatic arrest and for all his political troubles.
So what would you say is the current mood in the country? Are there still protests ongoing? What's the situation like as we speak?
Well, since Khan's arrest was declared unlawful yesterday, the mood did get a bit better. We didn't see any mass protests, in any other parts of the country. But the situation in the capital remains tense, but in a pocket. And that pocket exists in the area where the guest houses where he is being housed and the courthouses where he has been present all day. So the situation there has been tense because Khan supporters are present there. His party gave a call yesterday asking people to come and gather in that area, and they were told that Khan would address them. But the fact is that the capital government, the city administration here, has also invoked Section 144, which prohibits gathering of more than 4 people. And as soon as Khan's party called on his supporters to come, the city government also issued a statement on social media saying, don't come because there's a prohibition. So in that pocket, we saw there was shelling today because police tried to push people back and not allow them to congregate. And I drove through that area and the air was rather heavy with just the smell of tear gas. And there were people standing outside their houses, even because when you shell tear gas, the fumes spread a lot. So even in residential areas near the courthouse, people were standing outside their homes with their faces covered in cloth, and they were helping each other out with water, with salt. So that one pocket of the city did get tense. But if you travel around the rest of the city, other than seeing a couple of access ways blocked, situation is pretty normal.
And we know that so far 10 people have been killed and some 2,000 arrested. And the PTI party says peaceful protests will continue. But how does a peaceful protest switch up to turn into such violence and really so deadly?
Well, that's an interesting and complicated question. Again, if you are a member of Khan's party, or if you're a supporter of Khan's party, your narrative is that the protests were supposed to be peaceful, and that somehow either planted people started the violence, or that the police engaged in very heavy-handed action. But what we also saw was a lot of anger from people. So part of PTI's narrative also is that this is a natural reaction from people, because they see that the establishment, that the government is not listening to them, it's not appreciating or respecting the will of the people. So now people are expressing their will. And that's why these protests have gotten so violent. And if you're part of the ruling alliance, if you're in the government, your reaction is, what you're saying is that PTI is a violent party, that it's instigating terrorism, that it's instigating the kind of violence that so far has only been seen by religious extremists in Pakistan.
All right, Sarah Zaman, thank you so very much for your time on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Israel's military said it resumed striking targets in the Gaza Strip, which they said belonged to the Islamic Jihad militant group. Fighting has still not ceased after days of Israeli airstrikes and Palestinian rockets disrupted life for millions of people, and amid Egyptian efforts to cement a ceasefire. Israel launched a campaign against the Islamic Jihad militant group in the early hours on Tuesday and has since targeted its senior leadership. Islamic Jihad, the second biggest armed group in Gaza after the ruling Hamas Islamists, fired over 800 rockets, some deep into Israel. At least 30 Palestinians in Gaza, including women and children, have been killed, and at least 80 others injured in the airstrikes. A debt limit meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and top lawmakers that had been scheduled for today has been postponed. The leaders agreed to meet early next week. The aides to Mr. Biden's Republican House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, Democratic Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, top Senate Republican Mitch McConnell, and top House Democrat Hakeem Jeffries have started to discuss ways to limit federal spending and raise the debt ceiling. Mr. McCarthy told reporters at the Capitol that the delay was not a sign of any trouble.
They harmed every single family by bringing inflation to our country. The House passed a plan to avoid the debt default. We cap spending, we grow the economy, and we responsibly raise the debt limit. And there's only 15 days to go. How has the president handled this? The exact same way he's handled the border. He ignores it and hopes it goes away. But President Biden and Senator Schumer are stuck on no. They have no plan, no proposed savings, and no clue. Apparently, President Biden doesn't want a deal. He wants a default. Mr. President, my message is very simple. Do not miss another deadline like you just missed on Title 42. Our country cannot afford it. The Republicans will always act responsibly and will also always look for solutions.
It was an intense week for Europe's relationship with China. Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang visited Germany, France, and Norway in an attempt to strengthen diplomatic ties within a mutual policy of strategic autonomy. At the same time, the European Commission is said to be working on a proposal to sanction 7 Chinese companies accused of providing components for Russian weapons. EU officials also say Europe should work to reduce its dependency on China. DW correspondent Andrea Napori in Berlin has more. Andrea, now this week we've seen contradictory reports about the state of EU's relationship with China. Where do we stand right now?
Yeah, this week we've seen some mixed signals, indeed. Starting with Germany, the Chinese shipping giant COSCO got the green light to acquire 24.9% of the Tolleror container terminal in the port of Hamburg. That's a strategic European asset, a very important terminal for shipping and trade, and a big concession to China. Then at the same time, we've seen the Chinese Foreign Minister Qin Gang visiting Germany, France, and Norway. He wants to strengthen ties and restore some of those trade relationships, especially in the Nordics. And then on the other hand, well, there's been reports that the EU Commission is working on a proposal to sanction 7 Chinese companies accused of exporting components used by the Russian army in its weapons. Now, China, of course, wasn't happy about these reports and said we'll retaliate in kind if sanctions were issued by the EU. There's also a clear indication that the EU-wide comprehensive agreement on investments, which has been frozen since May 2021, won't probably go forward anytime soon. We got to say that these complexities are nothing new. If anything, this week encapsulates the EU's multifaceted relationship with China. After all, it's even the EU that uses a very specific wording when it comes to China. The EU says that China is currently a partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival, and that's certainly what we've seen this week.
So German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that Europe shouldn't aim to decouple from China, but rather seek a process of de-risking. What exactly does that mean?
Chancellor Scholz was quoting President of the European Commission Ursula von der Leyen. They believe that Europe shouldn't aim for a strong decoupling from China, as that's what the United States are trying to do, and that's what they would probably like their European allies to do as well. But rather, Europe should try to minimize risks in key economic and scientific areas. That's what they mean by that, without completely severing ties in diplomacy and trade. Now, trade. In 2022, import and exports between Europe and China amounted to 850 billion euros, and many sectors of the EU economy still rely on China for production, supply, and more. China now also plays a relevant diplomatic role in trying to end the Russian war in Ukraine, and that, of course, was also the key topic of Minister Qin's visit to Europe this week. With all that in mind, we know and it's clear that China's authoritarian nature is incompatible with core EU values, and Xi Jinping's assertive foreign policy is also seen as a growing threat. In a way, the EU does not want to repeat its Russian mistake with China, hence the attempt to maintain trade and diplomatic ties. At the same time, they still want to lessen a dependency that could become really problematic in the future.
Andrea, what's the position of other European countries on China then?
Well, for example, French President Macron has been acting on a bit of a different agenda, we could say, claiming that Europe should act as a third superpower between China and the US. He caused some controversy during his visit to China in April by saying that Europe shouldn't be America's follower in its China policy. Ursula von der Leyen replied to that by warning against China's divide and conquer strategy with Europe. France certainly has friendly relationship with China. After Minister Qin's visit to Paris this week, French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna said that the country is seeking to strengthen communication with China, especially about key issues like the war in Ukraine. Italy also plays a key role. It's the only G7 country to be part of China's Belt and Road initiative, but now the government is discussing ways to get out of the deal without angering China. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, though, said the debate is still ongoing and a decision on the matter hasn't been taken yet. There's still time. Despite some of these inconsistencies we've seen, what we also see is that Europe is trying to keep all its member states on the same page. That's the only way, indeed, that we could strengthen the EU's position in its dealings with a stronger China.
All right, thanks very much for that. Appreciate you. And welcome back. Sudan's two warring fractions have signed an accord to protect civilians and aid deliveries from violence, but could not agree on a ceasefire. This is the first step to providing relief for Sudanese civilians trapped in the conflict, but there is still a long way to go. The rival parties promised to respect humanitarian principles, but they didn't agree to pause the fighting. According to a statement, both sides will allow safe passage for people leaving battle zones, protect relief workers, and will refrain from using civilians as human shields. The two sides committed to allow in needed humanitarian assistance after looting and attacks that targeted aid. They are still discussing a proposal for a truce and a mechanism to monitor it. U.S. officials have been mediating the talks together with the Saudis. An American diplomat described the talks as difficult, with the two sides still far apart. The United Nations Human Rights Council narrowly passed a motion to increase monitoring of human rights abuses in Sudan, where hundreds of civilians have been killed since a conflict erupted last month. 18 countries voted in favor of the Western-led initiative, 15 voted against, while 14 abstained. The motion had been backed by Western countries, including Britain and the United States, to condemn abuses by Sudan's warring factions, but many other countries voiced opposition. No African country voted in favor of the initiative. Sudan's ambassador described the conflict as an internal affair and called for African solutions for African problems.
I'm glad that the Human Rights Council has voted today in favour of peace, in favour of human rights, in favour of international humanitarian law, and in favour of the people of Sudan, who are the victims of this unnecessary conflict that we all want to see end as soon as possible. I think it's really important that the people of Sudan know that we here in the Human Rights Council, here in Geneva, are watching what is happening, that we're appalled by what we see, and that we support their aspirations for a democratic, civilian future in which their rights are protected.
Time limit is 2 minutes.
Meanwhile, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees spokesperson Olga Sarado said some 200,000 people have fled from Sudan to neighboring countries since violence erupted last month, adding that tens of thousands have arrived in Chad in recent days. At the same briefing, UNICEF spokesperson James Elder said that a factory in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, producing food for malnourished children, has been burned down. Airstrikes and artillery pounded Khartoum today after Sudan's warring army and rapid support forces paramilitary failed to agree to a ceasefire, despite committing to protect civilians and allow humanitarian access.
Violence in Sudan continued for a fourth week. Around 200,000 refugees and returnees have been forced to flee the country, with more crossing borders daily seeking safety. Additionally, hundreds of thousands have been internally displaced, with many more people confined to their homes, unable to access necessities. The humanitarian response to this emergency is challenging and costly, not only inside Sudan because of insecurity, but also as refugees and returnees are arriving in remote border areas in neighboring countries where services and infrastructure are scarce or non-existent.
So a factory in Khartoum that produces therapeutic food for children in Sudan suffering the most dangerous form of malnutrition has been burnt down. Now, that fire has destroyed 14,500 cartons of ready-to-use therapeutic food, and that was set to be transported to locations for what is life-saving treatment for around 14,500 children for 6 to 8 weeks. You can equate one carton to one child, 14,500 cartons. Now, this is, probably the darkest, most distinct illustration to date of how this conflict is threatening the lives of children through multiple means.
We expect these talks on ceasefire to start off again from today or from tomorrow. It shouldn't technically take too long to agree on the modalities of a ceasefire, but of course it's also a political question where the negotiators in Jeddah have to go back to their respective leaderships.
Sudan's Forces of Freedom and Change, a political group leading an internationally backed plan to transfer to civilian rule, welcomed the start of talks in Jeddah between Sudan's army and the paramilitary rapid support forces following weeks of fighting. Khaled Omar Youssef said the group has been in communication with the two warring factions, other civilian groups, as well as regional and international powers to end the fighting and reach a political solution. The Sudanese army and RSF delegations have been meeting since the end of last week in talks sponsored by the United States and Saudi Arabia in the Saudi city of Jeddah on the Red Sea. Negotiations aim to secure an effective truce and allow access for workers and suppliers after repeated ceasefire announcement failed to stop the fighting. Meanwhile, Sudan Finance Minister Jibril Ibrahim said the Sudanese government will work on resolving problems related to salary payments halted by a war in the country for more than 3 weeks. Mr. Ibrahim promised the resumption of the flow of goods from the port. The conflict shaking Sudan has dealt a crippling blow to the heart of the country's economy in the capital city, Khartoum, as well as disrupting internal trade routes, threatening imports, and triggering a cash crunch. Shortages of items such as flour and vegetables have been reported in Khartoum, along with price hikes. Long queues form in front of bakeries and supermarkets in the capital. And the East African community has urged Democratic Republic of Congo's leader to respect regional states' moves to deploy forces in an attempt to stabilize eastern parts of the country. DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi accused the East African forces of not doing its job, warning if it did not do its job by June, it would be asked to leave the Congo. He also accused the force of colluding the M23 rebels. EAC Secretary General Peter Mathuki said he had not received any communication regarding Mr. Tshisekedi's complaints, saying any issues related to and raised would be discussed by EAC heads of state. Mr. Mathuki said, "Let's honestly respect members of EAE Summit in their own rights because I know they are in charge of this situation." The EAC chief said that the criticisms of the force were not justified. DR Congo's criticism of the East African force came a day after the Southern African Development Community, SADC, approved the deployment of troops to the east of the country. And the United Nations World Food Program is appealing for urgent funds to provide rapid food assistance to more than 2 million people in Chad. WFP Country Director in Chad, Pierre Honorat, said he expected to provide for 30,000 refugees who had crossed to Chad to flee the recent fighting in Sudan. The WFP warned that food for refugees and internally displaced people in Chad would come to a halt this month due to financial difficulties. In a separate warning, the WFP said hunger is set to hit a record high in Sudan, with an additional 2.5 million people affected by the ongoing bloodshed. A major highway leading out of Uganda's capital, Kampala, to the southwest of the country has been cut off after a bridge collapsed following flash floods. In the early hours, traffic was brought to its standstill by knee-deep running water across the road. And as the water receded later in the day, it was discovered that part of the bridge at River Katanga had collapsed. Swaths of land in Luera Swamp, a major part of the Lake Victoria catchment, have been reclaimed for farming, and a lot of sand mining carried out in the area in recent years. The country's roads authority has been advising travelers to use alternative routes to get to the main cities of Masaka, Mbara, and further towards the borders. The highway is an important travel and trade route for the country, as it is the main highway for exports and imports from across the region, not only to the southwest, but also to and from Tanzania Rwanda, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. At least 20 people have died in Uganda in recent weeks due to the landslides and flooding. Flooding has also claimed hundreds of lives in Rwanda and DR Congo. Katrina Asso is the last speaker of Nju. When she was a girl in South Africa's Northern Cape, Katrina Asso stopped speaking her mother tongue, Nju, after being mocked by other people and told it was an ugly language. Now, at age 90, she is the last known speaker of Nju, one of a group of indigenous languages in South Africa that have been all but stamped out by the impact of colonialism and apartheid. Instead, she spoke Afrikaans, the language promoted by South Africa's white minority rulers. Later, as an adult, Asso realized the importance of preserving her mother tongue and founded a school in her hometown of Uppington to try to pass it on. Or grandmother Katrina started teaching Nju to local children around 2005 and later opened a school with her granddaughter and language activist Claudia Sniman. But the local school property was vandalized during the COVID-19 lockdown and now lies abandoned.
So we got to the point where we have one speaker left of a language because during apartheid and colonialism, people were actually physically hurt. So I remember a woman telling me in Uppington that they were pinched whenever they spoke the language, and they would be told, you don't speak this language around here. So subsequently, they started associating the speaking of the indigenous language or their mother language to their mother tongue to pain. And so because of the pain associated with the speaking of the language, that deterred them from speaking the language. And so we got to a point where people either assimilated, took on another language like Afrikaans, or just stopped speaking their mother tongue at all. So when we lose the language, two of the most important things that I think we lose, the first one is an identity, because people have a close relationship to their language and it makes them who they are. So that's the first thing we lose, and subsequently people tend to feel a lack of sense of belonging. The other thing we lose is history, because if a language dies, we don't get access to the history, the type of people, those people, when the type of words they use and how those words link to other languages, so we lose a history.
Albania! Woo! Cyprus! Woo, 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 woo. Estonia! Woo! Belgium! Come. Yoo-hoo!
There we go.
Austria!
Lithuania! Poland! Australia!
And finally on the program, the second semi-final of the 2023 Eurovision Song Contest was held in Liverpool, Northern England yesterday, followed by a press conference with the winners. Poland, Albania, Cyprus, Estonia, Belgium, Austria, Lithuania, Australia, Armenia, and Slovenia all succeeded at the semi-final. The 10 qualifiers join the qualifiers from Tuesday's first semi-final. 2022 winner Ukraine and the Big Five, Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain in the grand final tomorrow.
Hi, Andrew. Thanks for your performance today.
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, we have no time to... Huge round of...
I think the most amazing moment was when I started feeling the support from the fans, and I started getting a lot of amazing messages, as well as the support I've received from my whole family, because they just give their whole heart to me, and that's amazing. On the other hand, I think the most challenging was how many hours we had to spend at the rehearsals, because we worked really, really hard to make Poland, my country, proud.
I'm hoping to become the next Kylie Minogue.
And I'm hoping to become the next Danny Minogue. So yes, is the Australia has such a wonderful history of bands. You know, a lot of great artists and a lot of great bands have come from Australia. So why not Voyager?
Good idea.
Oh, it's amazing. And Voyager are just, I don't have a bad word to say about them. They're fantastic. They supported me a year ago. And it's a really beautiful moment to be sharing this together with them. It's life is a crazy thing. And to be in this position now with Voyager on the other side of the table, and we're both going to the grand final, this is something that I'm never, ever going to forget. So credit to every single person on this table today and all the other acts that performed too. This is such a demanding, beautiful thing, the Eurovision Song Contest, and everyone should be so proud of themselves.
Honestly, we get this question the most. Like, people come up to us and they say, who the hell is Edgar and why the hell did you write a song about that, honestly? And we're like, you know what, we wish we could say it was a genius idea from the start.
Searching for answers,
It
you know,
wasn't.
but we can't find one.
It just kind of happened,
Sorry.
but it turned out to be a great decision, and we just kind of went with it. And yeah, it turned out that Edgar Allan Poe, yes, he's probably one of our favorite writers now.
And that brings us to the end of the program. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Susan Ilian. Good night.